welcome to the Holy Ship Podcast. These are conversations about church leadership and culture. I'm Scott Neal, your host. On this episode, we have a young, top-shelf leader, a young man who is changing the world, a preacher, a husband, a father, a man who knows what it's like to be addicted to dying and depression, but because of Jesus, is now addicted to living and joy. I am talking about the one and only Chris Dew. Welcome to the Holy Ship Podcast, Chris.
Hey, man, it's an honor to be on. Absolute honor to be on.
Well, I am glad you are. Hey, you know, it has been 4 years since you and I first sat down to record a podcast.
It's been that long?
Yeah. It was in September of 2017.
Oh my gosh, that's wild. Absolutely wild. It's been that long. A lot has happened since then.
Yeah, a lot has happened. I want to get into some of the things that have actually happened. When we first recorded a podcast back in 2017, you were recently married. You just got married to your beautiful wife, Kathleen. Is she still putting up with you?
Yes. Yes, man, she has lots of patience and lots of grace on me. And yeah, man, so we've been married almost 5 years now.
That's right. In just a couple of months, you'll be celebrating your 5th anniversary. Time has gone by, I'm sure.
It has flown, man. It's flown.
And you've also had the birth of your beautiful daughter, Evelyn Joy. Is that right?
Yeah, that is, man. So she's about 6 months old now, a little bit over 6 months old, and is a whole lot like her daddy, which is a good thing in some ways, and then we're a little nervous in some ways.
What's good about that?
She's very passionate. So that can be used hopefully for good things, and has some strong convictions about what she likes and what she doesn't like. So
right. Now, are you and your beautiful wife sleeping, or is she keeping you up at night?
Yeah. So we had been sleeping really good. It was about 12 hours a night until last night, actually.
Okay.
And we are unswaddling her right now, which is it's a whole deal. So we didn't sleep much last night, but that's why we have a whole bunch of coffee right next to me right now.
Right. The coffee keeps us all going, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Amen.
Hey, man, you also, since the last time we talked, you released your first book, The Real Answer to Addiction, man. Congratulations on your book, by the way.
I appreciate it, man. There's a lot of pain in that, as you know. I think you got a copy in the mail, man. And, there's a lot of pain, but that is a spot in culture right now, that I feel like is a huge felt need, that I feel like that, that I had a little bit of value to add in, the conversation with, just my story from heroin addiction and all the things that I've learned over the past almost 11 years now of, walking with Jesus, man. So, it was a sweet process. Writing is very different from speaking and sermon prep and all that stuff, man. But I really enjoyed, the process of writing it, and I'm hoping to write more in the future, possibly.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I saw it come out, I was so excited for you. And in fact, there are no doubt some folks listening to this podcast who this is their first introduction to you, Chris. They're maybe they heard the first one, possibly they didn't because it's been 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to take just a couple, 3 minutes here and just give a little backstory to who Chris Dew is and how this kind of book came to be about. Just share a little bit of who you are and from where you've come.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So I'm originally from Raleigh, North Carolina, and had a horrible speech impediment as a kid. I could not talk at all. I couldn't order food at restaurants. I couldn't answer questions in class. Hopping on a podcast with somebody like you would be my greatest fear, right? Like, could not do it. This was, horrible. And also I had this emptiness on, the inside of me that I really didn't understand why it was there. And it was like a hole in my soul. And with all that anxiety and the speech impediment stuff and the emptiness and that hole in my soul, as a small kid, that I just made a decision that I was going to try to get as much pleasure from the world as possible. And I went hard into anything I could get my hands on. It was like sports and stuff at first, and then it was popularity, and then eventually girls and pornography. And eventually I smoked weed for the first time. And I thought had my answer. I was like, this is great. It kind of calms me down a little bit. The hole that's in me kind of shrinks for a little bit. And the plan was only to smoke weed, though. That's the only thing I ever was going to do. Harder drugs were not for me. It was just weed. But pretty quickly, it escalated.
Yeah.
And I was on harder and harder and harder drugs. And eventually, I was a heroin addict. As a senior in high school, I was a full-blown heroin junkie. And as you can imagine, that was a pretty hard type of lifestyle. All kinds of issues, from health issues, to legal issues, to family issues, financial issues, all kinds of different things. And I was like, man, I got to get off of this stuff. This is really bad. This is ruining my life. So I was in and out of treatment centers, and I tried everything to get sober. I was in and out of meetings. I was on all kinds of medication, and I could not get sober, Scott. I tried all the world had to offer in that realm. Every single, all the counseling, everything. And I was a junkie still. I got down to like 100 pounds, and was at rock bottom. Had a few other things that happened that I think we chatted about last time. I lost my dad. Found him dead of a heart attack, and just hit a bottom. I was out of money, and I was 20 years old, and the options were either to be homeless or to try yet another treatment center. And I ended up at a treatment center in Florence, South Carolina. And I was there for about a week, and I was invited to a church service. And I was not raised in the church. I didn't have any higher power view or anything like that. I was just like, yeah, it's Christmas Eve. I'll go. I heard there's like hot girls and cool music, so let's go check it out. And I went, but that night I heard about Jesus. I heard the gospel. And I had heard it, as a 12-year-old, as a 15-year-old, ongoing, but like I heard it that night. Like the Holy Spirit just, man, he woke me up in a moment. And I know that's a rare story, right? People normally have that slow kind of progression towards Christ. I had an instantaneous, I was a, heroin junkie who could not talk. I heard the gospel. I placed my faith in Jesus. And it was 11 years ago, and I've been following him ever since, all by his grace. But yeah, man. So, yeah, man, I've been clean ever since. And then a few months after that, I felt a call to ministry. And I was like, what does that look like? He's like, I want you to travel and preach the gospel. Man. And I was like, bro, I literally can't order a hamburger at a restaurant. I cannot talk. This is a terrible idea, God. And I read Exodus, and I was like, oh yeah, this is in here, right? But I was like, man, I'm in, I guess. If you can use me, and if this is the call you have on my life, then I'm here for it. And slowly over time, he's healed my speech about 80% of the way, possibly. I have some hesitations, every now and then, and you'll hear it on this podcast. But I've been, traveling and preaching now for almost 7 years, and it has been a wild ride, man. So that's a little bit of my story, and
so much more of it is in your book. And people can pick up your book and read it and also listen. You got so many messages online and different places where people can hear you. And I want to get to your travel schedule, because it is booming. It looks like you are busy.
Too busy sometimes, man. It's hard, Scott, because, as you know, like early on, all the options were either bad or good. It's either I'm going to go and I'm going to use drugs, that's bad, or I'm going to go to church, and that's good. But slowly over time, as you keep following Jesus, it's either, okay, these opportunities are good, or they're great opportunities. And it's like, okay, I have to say no to the good in order to say yes to the great. Sure. There's a book on that, right? But then now it's like all the opportunities are either great or they're actually from God.
Wow.
And I think that's the hard spot, because I want to say yes to all the good ones and the great ones and some of the bad ones sometimes, sure. But he's like, man, I have a call on your life, and this is what it is. And I am I'm hard headed though in that
Yeah.
space. So I say yes to more than I should
Yeah.
probably.
Well, I tell you what, it's real fun to watch you grow. It's incredible to stand back and just kind of watch on social media and see the churches you're at and the audience that God has just allowed you to speak to and have influence in their lives. I mean, it's really fun because I remember 4 years ago when you came, you were just really getting started and kind of getting your schedule filled, and we had the honor of having you here and just to watch you be able to stand up and speak to our folks, and so many of our folks just fell in love with you, and I know they continue to pray for you, and there's probably even a few that continue to follow your ministry and your podcast, which I want to get to in a minute, and pick up your book. And I've even had some discussions in counseling sessions, and I use you as an example
Come on,
of
man.
of
Praise the
what God
Lord.
has done, and it's just great. So to stand back and just watch you continue to grow and move into your calling in such a almost effortless. I mean, it's just the schedules are just unfolding. God's given you influence, and there's people who have an audience that's pulled you under their wing and mentoring you, I know, and opening up doors. It's just beautiful, Chris. So I'm proud of you,
I
and
appreciate it, Scott.
it's just
Appreciate it,
amazing
Pastor
to
Scott.
watch what's going on, man. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's His grace, man. Absolutely His grace. I'm just hanging on for dear life. And I'm extremely thankful for pastors like yourself who, when you're like, who is this kid with long hair, kind of looks like a drug addict still. I don't know if he's sober. I'll have him into my church
That's right.
and to speak still, man. And like,
Yeah.
just am am just really grateful. I
Oh
have
man,
people like you in my life
no, it's
who have just
it's
taken a
joy.
chance on me.
No, it was an honor for us to have you here, and again, just watching you continue to do what you do best, it's just beautiful. I noticed that the amount of substance abuse disorders in our country are just exploding. I see it everywhere. Believe you even have a stat, I believe, on your website that says 20 million substance abuse disorders in our nation. 200 people dying every day. I mean, that's staggering when you really think about it. That is unbelievable. And you are right in the middle of that, trying to bring hope and trying to bring joy to people who are chasing joy. I know that that's something that I remember very well when you first came and spoke on that, talking about kind of switching out the joy, that when you find the joy in Christ, that it can replace so much of the synthetic joys in our life, which I think is just an incredible way of communicating the deliverance of Christ and replacing that fake joy. So this past Sunday, I don't want to get too far into this, but this past Sunday I talked about the woman at the well, and when Jesus comes and her life is impacted. And at the very end of that, he tells his disciples, you guys have a saying, 4 more months and then the harvest, but I say, look now, it's right in front of you. So Chris, you're traveling, you're going to these churches, you're crisscrossing our nation, you're in smaller churches, larger churches, you're no doubt hearing story after story at the end of your messages from parents and people telling you about
Yeah, yeah.
how drugs have impacted. You're seeing a white harvest field, are you not?
Yeah, man, I think it's interesting in culture right now. Just as I travel, it's twofold, kind of. And I'm
Okay.
sure that it's exactly the same way with you. In one sense, I sense a hardening to the gospel in
Mm,
America with all the political division and stuff. And I feel like that our culture or the church has kind of gotten a reputation that's not great over the
yeah.
past 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
Um, so in one space, it's that, right? There's a hardening to, oh yeah, you're about that stuff that I see on the news, and therefore I don't want any part of you. Yet on the other side, that I think there is a harvest that's
Mm,
happening, especially in the realm of addicts, because they have tried everything the world has to offer. Um, and I think that COVID was especially hard for a lot of addicts because they were isolated. I explain this story in, I think, chapter 5 of my book, but there's this analogy called Rat Park. And I think you've heard me talk about this before. But there was a study done a long time ago where this scientist put a rat in an empty cage, and that they had a plain water bottle in there and a water bottle that had opiates in it.
yeah.
And almost 100% of the time that the rat would try the heroin water bottle and he'd get addicted to it and then he'd OD and die.
Mm.
And that's how we understood addiction for so long in America, is that if you have access, to heroin or crack or whatever it is, then you'll use it, and that you ultimately die, right? So we have had the approach of the war on drugs, right?
Right.
So if you are on drugs and we put you in a cage, ultimately in jail, and that eventually like you'll learn your lesson because you're not exposed to it, all those things. But in the 80s, there was another study done. It was in Canada by a man named Bruce Alexander. And he did this thing called Rat Park. And what he did is he made this huge cage with all these rats, all this cheese in there, swinging things, all kinds of stuff in this place. And he had the exact same two water bottles, a plain water bottle and a heroin water bottle. And it's interesting because in the isolated environment, almost 100% of the time that they would try it and they like it and they get addicted to it. Yet in Rat Park, hardly any of the rats actually use the heroin.
Wow.
Super interesting, right? Because in the isolated environment, I use it, I get addicted. Yet in the connected environment, I won't use it. So quarantine for many addicts has acted like that empty cage for them, right? That I'm an isolated rat in the cage, and I had community in AA or NA in church or whatever, but now I'm, isolated and I'm addicted again. So
there's been an explosion of more use during COVID.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been an explosion, and I don't know the exact number. I wish I could quote it, but it's more overdoses in 2020 than ever in the history of our country. The highest amount ever. And man, addicts are hungry for hope. All people, I feel like, are hungry for hope. But the addicts I interact with on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis and stuff, man, they are hungry for community, hungry for hope, hungry for that joy that you were talking about,
right,
that isn't found in the alcohol and drugs and stuff. They've tried that, yet it's instant satisfaction and then long-term emptiness.
Yeah.
Yet with Jesus, it's slow, patient, rhythmic joy. And that's what I'm addicted to today. And that's what I see a lot of people responding, to, is that offer.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, so when you go to these, when you go to the churches and you talk, no doubt, with the pastors and staff members and parents and things like that, and they're telling you stories, probably of their city and what's happening within them. How do you help some of these pastors, get started in reaching addicts? I mean, that's not an easy thing, and maybe I'm just kind of confessing here my own weakness, but that it's not easy, Chris. There's you typically, this is just my experience, you typically don't open the door on Sunday morning and a lot of addicts walk in and walk to the front and and give their life to Christ and have the story that you have. You mentioned it's a rare thing that there was this instantaneous meeting of Christ and boom, delivered. Most of them continue to struggle and battle, and they don't have the connections when they leave the church, and they're embarrassed to walk in the doors, and a lot of pastors feel very untrained and they don't know what to say to them or how to help them. So can you give a little bit of maybe some things that the average local church might do in their community or city to help bring some hope to these addicts?
Absolutely, man. Well, there's a spectrum of options. And a lot of the content that I'm about to explain comes from Fuller Seminary that took a class out there. And I actually have a podcast with one of the professors. It's on the Real Answer to Addiction podcast, where he outlines this. So this is all from them. It's not personal stuff. But there's a whole spectrum, right? One end of the spectrum is to just be a recovery-friendly church. All that means is that you're heavy on grace, have some resources there aimed at helping addicts, have some connections with some counselors in the area that you can outsource, and to maybe once a year, have a Sunday aimed at addiction and recovery. I mean, that is the, entry level. Right. You can do that like tomorrow. Yep. Right. And in some churches, that's a process, right, to become a recovery friendly church. But I think that's the lowest buy-in. And honestly, that's what a lot of pastors want to do. They're like, hey, I don't feel called, to have a whole organization or anything in my church that helps addicts, yet I can be a recovery friendly church, right? So, having some cards in your care room or your prayer room that talk about addiction, to train your care and prayer people on how to minister to them, all that type of stuff, right? So that's the easy buy-in. The next level is AA in the basement, is what it's called, right? So this is just where you have an AA meeting in your church. That you don't run it, that you don't have anything to do with it. You literally open your building and you have an AA or NA building, or just kind of small group in your church, which is easy as well. You just have to open the door.
And typically, places like AA are looking for churches to have these meetings in. That so if you make yourself a recovery friendly church, or you move on to the next level and say, hey, you guys can have an AA meeting here, is that something that they'll probably take advantage of and use?
Oftentimes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, oftentimes, yes, because there's lots of groups. I mean, they're all over, your city probably. I mean, if you hop online and look up AA.com, I think it is.
Sure.
No, I think that's American Airlines. But look up AA, Alcoholics Anonymous,
right.
And to look up all the meetings in your area. And there's tons probably.
Yep.
Which is the awesome part about that is you get them in your doors.
Right.
The crummy part about that is they're rarely going to come to your church,
Sure.
on Sunday, right? It's
Absolutely.
just a building
Yep.
for them.
Right.
The next option, and this is what we've done here at New Spring, is to do a bridge group, is what it's called, right? So it's a 12-step open share group with a higher power that's clearly defined as Jesus.
Okay.
So it's open share, come as you are, even if you don't believe, you can come hang out here. And it's a cool thing for Christians who are also in recovery to have a home there where they can actually talk about their faith and all these things, right? So that's the bridge group. The next one after that would be like a small group that has some content behind it. So the Real Answer to Addiction has small group content. It's online. It's for free, so you can use that. Or like, I don't know, another small group curriculum aimed at freedom, aimed at addiction. And then after that is a whole department aimed at recovery. That's where you have a worship gathering normally. You have counselors on staff sometimes. You have groups. You have retreats, all that. And then lastly, all the way at the other end of the spectrum is a church aimed only at people in recovery. And it's where that probably 80-90% of your people have a past in addiction. And it's a thing where we're going to do 12 steps from the pulpit. Like, we're going to aim this whole thing.
Now, how many churches, not exactly how many, but are there many churches like that in our nation?
No.
I didn't think so.
I know of 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah. I know of 3 or 4 that do that. And it's really effective. Yet I like the model where you're integrating into the larger body. There's a scripture, and this is out of context, but I think you'll get the point of what I'm using it for. But Romans 11, it speaks about the Gentiles being grafted in,
right?
And the Jews are being cut off, right? How you graft something in is that you wrap it, right? That you connect it and then wrap it for a season.
Right.
Yet if you leave it wrapped, ultimately what happens is that it hinders its future growth. I think oftentimes what we do in recovery is that we are in the body, right? So then we leave this wrap of the recovery community on there forever. I'm always an addict. I'm always an alcoholic. And I'm a proponent of that. That's actually a hindrance of your future growth. I like the model where you're in recovery for a year, 2, 5, 10, 20, and then you're grafted into the body, have friends that aren't in recovery, have a small group that's just church people, have spiritual mentors that aren't in recovery and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I notice a lot, New Spring Recovery. I see you post pictures there. You're speaking of that. Tell us a little bit about what New Spring is doing in the recovery ministry. How effective is it? How many people you guys have coming?
Trying to figure it out, Scott. Trying to figure it out. So we started, this was 4 years ago, having an open share Christian group, right? So we have a strong leader here that's on staff that has a past in addiction. He's been clean about 10 years and has a heart for helping addicts. So he just opened up, the doors and said, "I'm going to have an open share group, and that we're going to talk about Jesus and the 12 steps." And so there was like one person that came for a long time, and it was him and this one guy, and then it was three, and then it slowly grew over time, and then it hit a threshold where there was about 50 or so people. Um, and we started meeting, and I was like, man, I think we can have like a worship gathering for this and stuff. So we launched that in 20, I want to say 18, that we launched the worship gathering, and that we meet once a month there. It's about 100 or so people that come, 80 to 100 people on an average night. There's a whole lot of treatment centers that come to that, but we do worship and preaching. And then we try to integrate the people that come into the life of our church. We're about to start small groups as well, that are more content driven, as an on ramp of how to be a disciple. So we've got the open share group, have the monthly worship gathering, and also have the content groups that are about to start up, man. But here's the beautiful thing about recovery ministry is there's a lot of room to innovate. Yeah. There's so much room because, hardly anybody has it figured out. And if they have a good model that is awesome, in the context they're in, but sometimes doesn't work in every context. So there's tons of room, for innovation and dreaming and leaning into the Holy Spirit on what, how can we help addicts in our context?
Right. In my world, I've tried to build. I think we've been reasonably effective here at Forest Park to create a recovery-friendly environment here. We talk about recovery. I'm always mentioning from the front, or at least often, about counseling and therapy and AA, and we have folks in our church who have gone through AA or are still there that we sometimes highlight, and I'll have coffee with them and talk, and I do messages on addiction recovery and things like that, trying to create that atmosphere. But I always feel, Chris, that it's just not enough. And what I mean by that is I feel like the folks who show up because maybe they see a quote from me on Facebook or something about recovery, or I'm doing a message series on addiction, they come hopeful that they'll find more, and then that's really all we have to offer. We don't have a lot of small groups around addiction. We do some referrals out, but I always feel that I'm not offering very much to eat when they come. And that's always been something that's kind of bothersome to me, because as a pastor, I want to make a genuine difference in their lives. And I feel like there's a little bit of, hey, come to us. We're friendly here. We're welcoming. They come, and then they go, hey, do you guys have any groups, or do you have any counseling sessions? And then we're like, yeah, we don't really have a whole lot. I don't, that's just me, but I always felt like I just don't offer enough. But yet I know that it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of resources. And I don't mean money, but it takes some people who are truly committed to getting in the lives of these addicts and really loving them through the ugly process of recovery. So as a, just one local pastor, it's a tension that I'm always trying to manage in my life.
Yeah, no, but that's beautiful. And I think the initial step is having a heart for it. I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of pastors I meet with, they're like, I know it's a problem, but I don't really have a heart for it. Really? I hate that it's happening, but that's
how does that settle with you when you hear something like that, or you get that feeling? That's got to bother you, because that was you.
Yeah.
That was you just 12 years ago.
Yeah, man, I understand the, I understand the sentiment, but then also, man, I know, exactly what you're saying. It's hard ministry, and it's heartbreaking ministry as well. Just recently, I have had a few very, very close friends who had some strong recovery time, who've screwed up and are using again, and it's heartbreaking. Yet also, man, it's what Jesus did, right? He went after the wild ones. He went after the ones that were the outcasts, and the ones that were, shunned by the religious community. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here with you, man, but that's what Jesus did. He went after the wild ones.
But it's just not, it's hard to admit, but I think in a lot of ways, you don't get the immediate return on the investment, and it's hard to say it that way. It's terrible it sounds, I don't even know. It just sounds so anti-Christ to say that, but you invest in someone and invest in them and invest in them, and you would never admit. I don't think any local pastor or would ever say, well, I want to see a return on my investment. But there is a part that you go, how long do we invest, and then the person just goes right back out and uses again, and just kind of disappears into the night, and you never see him again, and you just think, wow, am I even making a difference here?
Yeah.
When there's other things I could be doing that probably would make an immediate difference. So I certainly get it.
Yeah.
But boy, it's hard to admit that, and it's I don't know, it just always has rubbed me the wrong way in my own life. So I just love to see what you're doing and how you're impacting people. It's beautiful.
It's hard. And one of the things we're doing as well is that we have a few, key partnerships with churches that I go in and teach, 3, 4, 8 times a year, and are helping to try to navigate that conversation in
Right.
churches. One in West Virginia, and are having a few conversations with other ones right now in Florida and in Virginia to try to figure out, man, like, what does this look like? Because, the pastors that have a heart and have experienced, the benefits and also the pain of helping addicts, who are hungry to help, man, I want to partner with people like that.
Right.
and to help to navigate it and to try to figure it out. So when I figure it out, I'll get back on the podcast and I'll tell you, this is what recovery ministry needs to look like.
Yeah. Well, listen, if people want to get up with you and learn more about this, it's chrisdoministries.com.
Yep. That's
right?
it, man.
Yeah. So that'd be the best way, probably, just to kind of follow what you're doing. Plus, they can they can follow your Christu Ministries on Facebook and possibly Instagram. I'm not sure what all the different handles you have there, but they can easily find you on Facebook. You're very easy to find. And plus the your website, the book that you've written, The Real Answer to Addiction. It's easy to pick up, purchase it through your ministry, purchase it through other places too, like Amazon and different places.
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, all that stuff.
Okay, great. And pick it up. And I highly recommend anybody listening to grab Chris's book. It's an easy read, a challenging read too at the same time, because it's really going to open up your world, maybe to a world that you don't think about very often. But pick the book up, get a few copies, pass them out to some friends. Churches, if there's a few pastors listening, it'd be a great book study to take your people through. If you're interested in looking at an addiction recovery ministry, this would get you at least started in the right direction. And then you could email Chris, message him or something on Facebook. He'll get back up with you as soon as he can. Invite him to your church, have him come in and do some ministry there too, and he'll get to you. He's busy right now, but he will eventually probably be able to get you on the schedule as well. I do have just a couple other questions for you, Chris, if you've got
absolutely.
time.
Come on, man.
How did the pandemic, and some of this we kind of already know the answer, but I like to just from a more personal perspective, how did it impact your traveling and your ministry was just getting some traction, and then all of a sudden, so many things were canceled and large gatherings you couldn't get together, and how did you kind of walk through that time?
Yeah, so for many. And I want to be very sensitive here. It was a very, very hard season, right? People lost their lives. Addicts really struggled in a lot of ways. But from an introvert who's on the road so much, it was honestly a blessing in disguise for me.
Okay.
To be able to be home and to be with my wife and to slow down for a little bit.
Okay. Good.
And it was a huge blessing on that front. And I did a lot of walking, a lot of reading, a lot of just healthy lifestyle stuff. I started going to seminary in that season because
that was my other question
time.
I had. I noticed you're at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. That's awesome.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I really love it. It's one of those things. I was not raised in the church. I didn't have hardly any understanding of scripture and the context, all those things, man, that we learn over time if you're in church, and I didn't have that. So I wanted to go back and to make sure that what I was teaching was orthodoxy and and was helpful. Started in the summer of 2020 and about halfway done with a master's now, which
that's great.
I'm enjoying that. Yeah, but quarantine, man, as an introvert, I absolutely loved it. The travel schedule slowed down a lot. But honestly, as we look back at our numbers of how many people we talked to in the fall once it opened back up and all that. We had a highlight year in
Wonderful.
2020,
It's
which
great.
I don't know how that math works, yet
Yeah.
the types of events that we were getting early on in 2020 and then also at the end just overcompensated the lack that we had there for a few months, and then 2021 has been our highest year ever after that. So I don't know what happened in that season,
Yeah.
but the Lord did his magic, and it was a really good year for us overall as a ministry.
That's great. Well, Chris, before we wrap this up, I'd like for you to talk to the parent, um, or maybe even the addict himself or herself who happen to be listening to this. Because I know when I put the podcast out, I put your name on it, I talk about addiction recovery. There's going to be people who listen who may have not heard any of the other podcasts, but they see that title, they see what we're talking about, they've heard me mention you before. We've had some folks in our church very directly impacted with heroin addicts. We have a lot of heroin use in our area. We've had some tragedies happen over the last couple of years because of it. We've had people who come up to me on a consistent basis. Please pray for my son. Please pray for my sister or my brother. So let's imagine they're listening right now, and they wish they could have that instantaneous delivery and power, but again, it's rare. So what about the mom who's discouraged right now, and what about the dad whose daughter he doesn't even know where she is or if she'll make it through? Would you talk to him just a minute before we wrap
Yeah,
this up?
absolutely, man. One of the most helpful things I've heard on this is from Al Anon. They offer the three C's, is what they call it. What they say is that you didn't cause it, that you can't control it, and that you can't cure it.
Hmm.
You didn't cause it. It isn't your parenting. It's not what you did when they were a kid. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And the harder one is that you can't control it. Even as a pastor who helps addicts all the time, that I can help, the random person at the rehab center or the church service, yet when it's my people, my friends that I've known for years and years and years that I did ministry with and are close to me, I want to control it, man. Like, stop, here's
Yeah.
what you need to do. Here's the action steps, but I can't. And I can't cure it. I
Yeah.
cannot, heal them. That's an act of God. So that's one thing. I think that's the most helpful thing I've heard, that
Yeah.
just frees us
Yep.
up to love and, to pray, yet also not to carry the weight on us. Because one of the things that's very common in, the addiction world is that the family gets, as sick as the addict
Mm.
sometimes, right? Because the new God of the family is the addict. We got to help them. I mean, we can't do that. We have to make the real God our God, and then to love them out of an overflow of that relationship that we have. So that's one piece is that it's not your fault, and that it's not up to us to heal them. But then on the other side of the spectrum, like there's hope. Like, I have seen lots and lots of drug addicts hear the gospel and follow Jesus and live in freedom. That's a real thing that happens. And
Yeah.
it isn't just once in a while, it happens. Like, people are responding to the gospel, and through the power of Jesus, his kingdom is coming into their life in such a profound way that they don't use drugs anymore because they have uh, found a greater joy, and it's his presence. So don't lose hope. And it's also helpful to understand it's a spiritual battle, that addiction is a complex result of the fall, and it involves spiritual warfare, it involves trauma, it involves spiritual malady, right? It's complex. It involves mental health issues. Oftentimes it's a complex result of the fall, yet uh, as Christ came, in what he did in his life and as his crucifixion and in the resurrection, he overturned all the results of the fall,
Yeah.
right? He brought his kingdom. So it's not just forgiveness of sins. He heals minds, right?
Right.
He heals, diseases. He casts out devils. It's holistic transformation that is offered in Jesus. Man, so pray. Like, it's a spiritual battle.
Yeah.
Let's pray for our addicts. Let's pray for the people we love, because I believe that that's really the only practical way to help, is to pray and to love, to keep the relationship intact yet not enable them. It's a hard road to walk there, because there's holes on either side of that, right? It's either that I want to cut the relation off completely, or that I want to hand them money and to let them live with me, and to enable, right? So you got to keep that intention as well. But ultimately, it's not your fault, yet there is hope, and the answer is Jesus.
That's great. Well, Chris, it's been an honor to have you here, buddy. Real honor.
I love you, man. I love you a whole bunch, man. We need to chat after this ends, and I want to hear about your life.
And we're proud of you, and just want you to continue to expand and grow and just do amazing things. So thank you for being with us on the Holy Ship podcast. It's a real honor.
I appreciate it, my friend. It's always a pleasure.